Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirant. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
This time on the Disrupt Your Career podcast, we have Jeff Gothelf with us. Jeff is a rebel, a disruptor like we are. He's a designer, a thinker, a challenger of the status quo. He's an author and speaker, and he's constantly evolving and learning. It's difficult to pin him down to just one thing, but his book, Forever Employable, sums him up beautifully. Jeff, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for being here with us on Disrupt Your Career.
My pleasure, Claire. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, well, let's get down to it. I've got a long list of things I want to be asking you about. I have been reading your book over the last couple of days and noting all kinds of similarities and crossovers, but I'm very interested. You've made a lot of changes along the way in your career, and I'm curious to understand, what did you think you would be when you grow up? When you were a boy? What sort of clues were there that you might end up doing the sort of wonderful work that you do now at the intersection of design and people and purpose?
That's such a great question. Nothing. There were no indications when I was a boy that this is where I would end up. Computers, I guess there were hints of computers. So tech, I suppose, has always been around. My folks, I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and I remember as a boy, my folks were in computers when that meant something, and it was like, right?
When it was something solid you could touch, right?
Well, yeah. What does it mean to work in computers? But that's literally how my folks, their jobs were described when I was growing up. What do your parents do? They work in computers. And as a kid, they would come home with those punch cards, like in the 70s, the way that you program these computers with punch cards. And I remember there's pictures of me as a kid playing with punch cards. And that was an indication that maybe tech was in my future. But the rest of this is all really a really interesting turn of events, some luck, some privilege, some explicit direction decisions, some stuff that I didn't choose. And what's really fascinating is in hindsight, what I see myself doing today is teaching more than anything, right? Everything I do is some flavor or variation on teaching. And if you'd have asked me 15 years ago if I saw myself being a teacher of any kind in the future, I would have said no. It never dawned on me that this would be something that I would be doing. Honestly, growing up, I wanted to be a rock star. I played in bands and toured around for a while, and really fell back, quote unquote, to computers when that inevitably fell through. But no, it's interesting. No real indication of that. It's just been an interesting turn of events, I suppose.
Wonderful. Yes. So the checkered, non-linear, exciting journey that unfolds itself almost. Tell me a little bit about the role of design and innovation in your life and how that has shaped your career and its transitions.
Yeah, so design was the fallback when the music career didn't pan out. And there was a relatively low bar in the late 90s for getting into web design. In fact, it was such a free-for-all back in the Web 1.0 days that essentially if you could spell HTML and you knew how to open up Photoshop, you were in pretty good shape to get a job in 1998, 1999 as a web designer, which is what I did. And that's when things started to take a more specific direction. The web was exploding in a good way for a little while before it exploded in a bad way. And I found myself in a position where I was doing web design work, which was fun and interesting. And for the first time in my life, really putting work out into the world that was being consumed by lots and lots of people globally, which was really interesting and fascinating for me. And then shortly after beginning my career, I was introduced to this concept of information architecture, which at the time was a relatively new field, a derivative from library sciences and so forth. But the idea was, look, you can't just build websites that copy org charts. You actually have to structure the information in a way that matches mental models, that makes it accessible and findable and usable. And that really began to take me down the path of user experience and interaction design. And I spent the next decade following that path into kind of more design roles as the web advanced, more interactive design work. And then ultimately finding myself about a decade into my career leading design teams at a high growth startup in New York City, and kind of looking at what became this new reality of software development around that time. So talking about 12 years ago or so, which was this idea of agile software development. And the interesting thing there is that it wasn't so much the agile software development practices, but more so the philosophies that really expanded my thinking towards a more innovative approach to building great products and services and making folks more successful.
Okay, fascinating. So the journey you went on started off perhaps as rather, maybe not random, but at least not necessarily truly focused on an end objective, but you found yourself getting into this space where you're thinking about the way people think and work and what their needs are, and matching that with the construction of products and services around it. So you had this moment of illumination in which you realized that you probably didn't want to be staying in the corporate world and climbing that ladder further and further, and you had some very interesting thinking that made you leave that corporate work behind. What do you miss, if anything, from being inside the corporate world?
I think there's two things that I miss. I think the social aspect of it is something that I miss. It's an easy way to make friends. It's an easy way to learn from colleagues very, very quickly. There's a sense of belonging. There's a sense, we could complain about the routine, and I certainly have done that myself, but there's an aspect of the routine that's kind of nice. You come in, you see the same folks every day, you share stories, you get to know each other. I miss that aspect of it a lot. I think we can attempt to recreate that as self-employed individuals, and I have, and it works, but it's definitely not the same thing, because we're not all working towards the same goals and the same challenges. And so I definitely miss that aspect of it. The other thing I miss, and it's interesting because this year I've been very fortunate to have one long-term client really take up a significant chunk of my time this year, which is rare. I don't typically work that way. So this year is a bit of an anomaly, but generally speaking, I miss the ability to deep dive into something for an extended period of time and really get into the weeds of it. I think as a consultant, and especially somebody who doesn't tend to take the long-term retainer type of engagements, although I'm not averse to them, it's just not really what I've done. I don't really get a chance to really dive deep for an extended period of time into something and become an expert in that domain or in that product or in that service or in that target audience. And I do miss that a little bit as well. There's something nice about really getting your hands dirty within that problem space. And that's something that I attempt to recapture.
Yes, it's a sort of constant dilemma, really, isn't it? Can you dig deep in? Well, no, not if you're being picked to do this piece of work here in one sort of tool and one sort of context, and then the next one somewhere else with something different. It keeps us busy and engaged, I guess, and constantly curious and learning, because each time you shift and jump from one project to another, there's an exciting learning curve to be embraced. But unless you get the longer term work, then the digging deep in is perhaps something missing, though perhaps it would be fair to say that writing books gives you a chance to do that deep digging.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you get into that subject matter and you do the research and you do the interviews and you work to translate your experience into something tangible and actionable for others. So there is a big reward in that. The interesting thing about that is that it's very antithetical. Writing a book is antithetical to the way that we encourage people to work in the books themselves. It's really funny, right? So the books that I've written talk about being innovative and creative and continuously learning and improving and taking small risks and building iterations off of evidence and that type of thing, and eschewing big bang releases. And books are the exact opposite of that. You work and you work and you work and you work, and then you launch, and then generally speaking, you hope. You know?
Absolutely. And you crystallize, of course, as well. The thing about a book is that once it's written, it's static.
Yeah, exactly. And look, you can change it. And these days, the publishing industry is definitely a bit more print on demand. But even then, like it's work, and it's expensive, and it's static. Certainly, the majority of it is static.
Absolutely. But you certainly have a broad range of tools at your fingertips and make good use of them. Tell us a little bit about this Forever Employable model that you have. You've met many individuals, and in the book you've shared a large number of their Forever Employable stories. What sort of characteristics would you say these people have in common, and what differentiates them? And perhaps even it would be fascinating to hear which stories surprised you the most in the research that you did.
So Forever Employable came about through a series, an ongoing inbound flow of requests from people who follow me, read my books, do whatever it is. And they said, Jeff, how did you get that book deal? Jeff, how did you get that speaking gig? How did you build your business? And those kinds of questions come in on a regular basis and have been coming in for a long period of time. And so I decided to write it down and to put it down in a book. And the basis of the book is, I think the subtitle of Forever Employable really says it all. It says how to stop looking for work and let your next job find you. Yeah. So how do you completely change the dynamic of your career 180 degrees, right? Instead of pushing yourself out into the world and chasing opportunities, how do you completely change that directionality and have those opportunities come to you and find you? And which is what I've created for myself. And the way that I know how to do that is to build a platform of expertise and thought leadership and content, and then network and build an audience around that, which then starts to create that safety net or that career insurance based on the reputation that you're building through this content generation, through this sharing back. Because all of a sudden people start to reach out and they say, oh, I read your piece, I heard your podcast, I watched your talk, I read your book, I follow you on Twitter, whatever it is. And, maybe you can come in and help us with this thing that we're facing that it sounds like you know a lot about.
Yeah.
And so that's what the book came about, how it came about. And in doing the research, we're really looking at people who have done this well, and some really great case studies have come out of that. And there's a lot of big names that you could think of, that people like Anthony Bourdain, for example. Yep. Anthony Bourdain was a chef. What made Anthony Bourdain a celebrity and a successful celebrity was, writing a cookbook. And it was a tell-all. It was like a tell-all cookbook that really kind of peeled back the layers of the New York City chef scene, if you will. And he became a storyteller. And if you look at the people that I profile in the book or that I profile on my blog, what these folks are good at is storytelling. They take their expertise and they base their stories on that expertise, and that's how they connect out to others. And to me, that's the key skill set, is being able to translate your experience, regardless of whether you think it's remarkable or unremarkable, into compelling stories that other people can consume and internalize and get motivated by.
Absolutely. So indeed, many stories, many well-told and well-related experiences in the book, and of course around you and all of us all the time. And certainly we have been very conscious in the work we do, both with our book and the articles that we write, that the story is what carries it. And there's theory and there's frameworks behind it, but what seems to be universally attractive to audiences and to simply human beings is the recounting of a story, and letting that come to life and shine its own light on the examples and the theories that you might be trying to espouse. So we certainly have that in common.
And you know, it's interesting. Since I was launching the book, and since launching the book, I've been doing an interview series on my blog called Forever Employable Stories, where I talk to people that I've identified as having created these forever employable careers, and their stories are amazing. And I really tried to get as varied a set of people as possible. And I continue to push that forward. But I mean, from the first person that I interviewed is a rock and roll guitarist. He's the guitarist for Whitesnake, a band that I grew up listening to. And he's amazing. Like, he's not just a guitarist, he's an author, and he's a teacher, and he's a writer and a collaborator. And then you work up to like Alden Mills, who's an ex-Navy SEAL, and he's an author and a speaker and entrepreneur. And these stories just go on and on about how these folks took the things that they've done, and then through sharing that experience, have built an audience around them, which now generates opportunities for them.
Now, what advice do you have for companies to do a better job at helping people to develop their employability, their forever way of doing things? You're very clear that this framework, this way of thinking, is not just for individuals who want to break out of the corporate world and do their own thing, but there's also a way to craft one's career in a different way through using your thinking. Tell us a little bit more about how companies can do better at accommodating that, and how we could pursue that path if that were one of the directions we wanted to go in.
I think the most important things companies can do is not see this as a threat. I've worked in organizations, and I've heard from individuals who say, look, I would love to do this, but my company isn't going to support this. If I'm successful, they're going to get worried that my brand is beginning to outshine their brand. I think that as an organization, one of the things that you really need to realize is that this is mutually beneficial. Yes, this individual is building a platform for themselves. Yes, it is their name out there, but it is also your name. And is their presence inside your organization that is going to attract a higher caliber of applicants to that organization. It will draw more interest and insight and positive reinforcement of your brand. And it makes the organization a more appealing hiring brand for a lot of folks as well. So I think that's the first thing that organizations really need to do is to not see this as a threat, but see it as a benefit and encourage it in folks. I think the second thing we need to do is allow people the opportunities to do this. And if one of the ways that, you know, an organization is concerned, well, this person is outshining us or driving traffic away from us, give them in-house opportunities to use those skill sets in their personal brand to help internally and to help sort of externally facing events that amplify the organization. So give them a keynote spot at your internal corporate conference. Let them write articles consistently for the corporate blog. Have them host the company podcast. Give them those opportunities, and you'll first of all, you'll see them thrive and you'll retain them. And secondarily, the organization reaps the benefits of that. And there are companies who do this. To be very, very clear, one of the organizations that's been very good at this is Microsoft. Microsoft has a set of people who do a job called tech evangelist. Tech evangelist, that job is going around, speaking at conferences, giving talks, tweeting, engaging with the community, sharing content, writing articles, talking about Microsoft technology and how it could work for you.
Indeed.
And there are individuals who have built their careers doing that, and Microsoft encourages that because ultimately they want that relationship with the developer community. And so this is a great way to do that.
Absolutely. And we recently interviewed Edie Goldberg, who wrote a book called The Inside Gig. I don't know if you've come across that, but that's very much
no,
the
I haven't.
thing. She's brilliant. And that's the whole notion, that every company should be creating opportunities for those who do other things than what they were hired for, can get a chance to do them if that brings value and or fulfillment. And it's a beautiful concept, and it's so simple, so obvious once you've thought of it. But that sounds very complementary to what you're talking about here, and I'd strongly recommend the book. I want to talk a bit more about another concept that you bring up in your book. You talk about using the Ikigai to help us, visualize our different mix of passion and mission and expertise and all that kind of stuff. And you talk about it also being applicable to teams. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? It's designed to be an individual concept of your reason for being or why you get up in the morning. The interesting thing is, I believe it's applicable to the teams at the team level as well. And really looking through these questions through the lens of a team really starts to give you a sense of, well, does the team really understand their reason for being? And I would argue that an overwhelming majority of teams building products and services today see their reason for being as deploy the product or service. And so this is something that that if you can change, if you can give a team meaning, if they can unequivocally, unanimously understand what it is that they're trying to do, right? What does the world need? How does our work help what the world needs? What are we good at? How are we going to meet that world need? What are we particularly suited to do, both as a team, as an organization? How do we create a situation where we actually love what we're doing? Right? Yeah. A lot of folks will go to work and they say, look, I love being a software engineer. I don't love the products that I work on. Right? Or I love being a designer, but I can't tell you, just my own personal experience, the majority of the work I did in the first half of my career, really didn't want my name on. Like, I enjoyed being a designer, but I didn't love the products that we were designing. If you can change that, if you can get the teams to love what they're doing, if you can empower them to be good at it and show them how it fits into what the world actually needs, like how are you making the world a better place with this particular tool? And then finally, equal and fair pay, right? So you're not only are you doing what you love, not only are you helping the world, you're good at this, and you're getting fairly compensated for this. This is the kind of work that every team should want to do. And so it becomes a really interesting challenge for organizations, for stakeholders, for team leads is, can you frame the work this way? And I think that if you can, and you can really kind of give the team this mission, this reason for being, I think you'll see better results.
Absolutely. Really key to not only engagement, but true satisfaction and fulfillment in career, which is certainly what we dream of being a universal thing at some time in the future. Tell me a little bit about, if you had one single piece of advice to give a beginner in the Forever Employable game, what would you be recommending?
There's so many. I think the most important thing, so here's what I recommend. I recommend this. First and foremost, believe that you have a unique story to tell, because you do. It can be overwhelming. You can look out into the world and you can say, look, everything's already been said 1,000 times over. My story isn't even unique enough to stand out as a blip in that crowd. And so I'm not even going to say anything. And I disagree. Your story is unique. No one has lived through your experiences exactly the way that you've lived through them. No one has overcome the exact same obstacles in the way that you have. No one has taken the exact same steps. And so you have a unique story to tell, and that is something that the world wants to hear. People want that validation to know that they're not the only ones struggling with something. So it doesn't have to be a story about massive success, for example. It could be a story about a struggle or a challenge or your first year on the job or whatever it is. There are individuals out there who are going through a similar challenge, and they would love to hear your perspective on that. And so to me, that's the biggest obstacle that stops people from even trying this, is they don't think they have anything important to say or anything important to share. And I think the most important thing that you can remember is that you do, and that people want to hear it. And that's, to me, is the best coaching I can give you on day one.
I was going to say that's a real coachy approach, and therefore, I and we empathize with it completely. Thank you. That's brilliant. A little cheeky question: when you're standing talking to a new friend at a drinks party or a dinner, and he or she asks what you do, how do you tell them without taking 10 minutes to explain it?
Yeah, these days it's really tough. I struggle with this one a lot.
My kids still don't know what I do, nor does my mom.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And I think about that too. I have two daughters, and my youngest daughter, the other day, she asked me, she goes, "What is it that you teach again?" Because it's not what I told her is that I told her that I help people build better products and services. Yep. That's what I teach.
Yeah.
Now, so that's the really, really short version of it. And that's what I do. Now, they'll say, well, how do you do that? Well, I write books, and I teach workshops, and I give talks.
And that's where you get into the tools rather than the essence.
Yes, but I help people build and scale great products and services.
Yeah. And that probably satisfies the majority in a social situation. It is just our kids who want to know more and more. I remember my daughter, when she was 8, telling all her friends that her mama made world peace. What she really meant was that I did coaching across borders. But it was a nice and very ambitious, rather overblown description, but it's always stayed with me. And I try to live into it little by little. And finally, tell us about the future. What's coming up in terms of the way careers develop, and the challenges that we've all had recently through COVID and all the other lovely events of 2020. What sort of direction do you see us taking in our careers and our lives, and how are you going to be tackling and supporting that?
I think those that make themselves findable and share their expertise and their knowledge freely are the ones that will continue to thrive as the world recovers from this, and as the sort of the whatever new reality sets in afterwards. If you look at it right now, the people that I know that are thriving, or at the very least stable, are the people who have some kind of platform, some kind of presence in the industry, in the domain. It's not to say that they've written a book. Some have, some haven't, but they are active in conversation. They are active in discussion. They're giving back. They're sharing. To me, that's the future of careers. That's the future of employment. I think it's really weird. And again, this it gets in a really sticky kind of dilemma here, right? But if I Google your name, let's say I'm a hiring manager, and I Google your name and I find nothing, or like I find your Facebook profile.
Yeah.
But nothing else. Or it's interesting, right? It feels strange to me, especially if there's 2 or 3 people competing for a role, and the other 2 folks have a decent online presence, and so that becomes an interesting discussion. Now the question is, well, how much is enough, right? What's enough of an online presence? And that's where this gets sticky, right? Because there's no quantifiable number. I can't say something like 7. If you have 7 things online, you're fine, right? It's more about the contribution that you make to the discipline and to the industry. Yeah. And I think that sets people apart these days. Yeah, and not everybody's going to do it. And so I think there's a real opportunity for you to stand apart by participating in the domain, in the industry, and the public conversations around your expertise.
Absolutely. And it's so much fun. And that's why you're here today, because you were willing to play the game of sharing and exploring. And we knew we wanted to get you, and you came, and that's just wonderful. And it's a constantly building process, isn't it? Each of us explores more, learns more, shares more, and the world gets richer as a result. And we get a fun career in the process. So I would say it's a resounding all-round win for this kind of approach to being forever employable. Jeff, I'm super grateful to you for having to come and joined us today. Your answers have been fascinating, and I'm looking forward to listening calmly later to everything you've said. And we will, of course, let you know when this is shared. And just once again, a final thank you.
My pleasure, Claire. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.